Good morning or afternoon or evening or whenever you are watching this. This is going to be a quick review and kind of clarification of some of the models of abnormality discussed in this introductory reading assignment. I am not going to go over everything in your textbook. Listening to this is not a substitute for reading your textbook. I'm just going to recap some of the important points that will be relevant as we go through this semester. So, if my clicky will work, there we go. So the theories that I'm going to talk about are the biological model, which is basically looking at genetics, neurotransmitters, brain function. The psychodynamic model, which comes from Freud. You can't have a psychology class without talking about Freud. We're going to talk about inner conflicts and defense mechanisms. And a quick overview of the cognitive behavioral model, the humanist existential model, the sociocultural model, and developmental psychopathology. So the biological model, this is brain stuff. This is looking at how your brain, your neurotransmitters can play a role in the formation of psychological disorders. Now, a couple of little tidbits that you're going to want to keep in mind as we move through the semester. I'm not going to ask you to memorize the entire brain. To be perfectly honest with you, biopsychology is actually my least favorite little corner of the world of psychology. Some of it's interesting, not the topic I love. You'll never see me teaching a biopsychology class. But the biological model, some key points to remember. One is that the amygdala, which is a section of your brain, the amygdala plays a huge role in fear reactions. A lot of your anxiety disorders, a lot of your panic disorders we can do some research showing that the amygdala is involved. One particularly interesting piece of research with that involves your fight or flight syndrome and your ability to calm yourself down when that feels activated. So the example that I always give when I teach intro is, imagine you hear a bear roar behind you, right? Well, if you're at a zoo and you hear a bear roar behind you, you might have that initial startled jump, but you're very quickly going to realize, okay, I'm at a zoo, the bear is in this enclosure, it might be loud, but I'm safe, I'm not in any danger of this bear. And so while you're gonna startle and have that jump scare, you're gonna very quickly be able to logic yourself down, because your amygdala was activated, but then those pathways in the brain that allow your amygdala to communicate with the other brain centers are going to be able to kind of calm your emotions down, slow down your breathing, lower your heart rate, and get yourself out of that fight or flight response. One thing that's really interesting that we found in biopsychology research is that individuals with PTSD, especially individuals who have experienced combat trauma and things of that nature, individuals who have been involved in the armed services, things like that, that response with their amygdala and the pathways with the other brain centers doesn't work quite the same, which is why sometimes individuals with PTSD, especially from combat trauma, if you know anybody, there's a lot of veterans who have been in combat who don't like fireworks, right? Because a big part of that is there's that startle from that explosion, which could have sounded like an explosion from a situation that at one time was much more dangerous. But that interaction in their brain where their amygdala would be interacting with some of those logic centers of, okay, false alarm, I'm safe, it's all good. That's actually not working quite the same way. That pathway is not as fast. That pathway is not as efficient. And so we do see the amygdala play a role in quite a few different fear disorders, panic disorders, anxiety disorders. A couple neurotransmitters that you'll want to remember as we make our way through this course. Serotonin plays a very important role in regulating mood. A lot of your psychotropic medications, which are the medications that affect your brain chemistry with the goal of reducing the impact or distress of a psychological disorder, a lot of the medications for that affect your serotonin balances in your brain, affect the way that the serotonin is absorbed, the way that neurotransmitter is bouncing around, because serotonin is very, very important in regulating mood. Now, dopamine is another neurotransmitter that's very important, but it's more on the side of motivation, pleasure, and reality perception. A lot of addiction involves dopamine because dopamine is released, again, with pleasure, with motivation, something that makes you feel good. If you like the area of biopsychology, there are some fascinating studies out there about what happens to the dopamine in your brain when you're gambling, when you win versus when you lose versus when you just walk into a casino or one of those situations. So if you like that area, definitely look at those. Now, the other side of the biological model is looking at genetics. Which disorders do we know have a strong genetic component? Now, with this, it can be really difficult to disentangle nature and nurture, because if your parents have a particular disorder and you also end up with that disorder, is it really because that was a genetic contribution, or was it because you were raised seeing that, and being raised in that environment did something that then caused you to be more likely to have that specific disorder? Disorders that we do know through research have high rates of genetic heritability are the schizophrenia disorders, the bipolar disorders, major depressive disorder, disorders that involve the autism spectrum, and then ADHD as well. So we have documented high rates of heritability with that. One theory that I am a big fan of that we'll go back to quite a bit this semester is called the diathesis stress model, which basically tries to explain this difficulty in disentangling. Is this genetics, or is this that you were raised with the specific, raised exposed to this disorder, to these stressors? And the diathesis stress model basically states that you're either born with a light switch or you're not, to use a very simple example, right? So being born with a genetic tendency towards a disorder is the light switch, right? So some people are not born with that light switch. It's not in their genetics. It's not there. Some people are born with that light switch. But then there's a whole lot of factors that's going to determine if that light switch ever actually gets flipped or not. High levels of stress, experiencing a trauma, experiencing a loss, experiencing some interpersonal distressors. There's a whole list of things that are going to determine if your light switch is flipped. And this basically creates a great starting point to study, okay, what is determining if this genetic heritability is going to be expressed? If my mom was schizophrenic, I know that might create a certain genetic risk. What determines if I ever actually express that tendency for schizophrenia? Right, and the next one is the psychodynamic model, and this is where we are going to get into Freud. If you are watching this for the bonus point activity, let's make the first word soda. I actually hate soda. That's an odd choice for me to pick, but that's what came into my head. All right, so the psychodynamic model is one of the oldest psychological models. Like I said, it was started by Freud. Now, we're not going to go into some of the more wacky ideas by Freud. If you really want to dig into the history of this, definitely watch for some of my sections of developmental psychology, child psychology, because we will absolutely dig into what Freud believed about childhood. But Freud basically believed that our behaviors, including our abnormal behaviors, are determined by these unconscious or subconscious psychological forces. Basically, we're not even consciously aware of what's driving our behaviors all the time. And that whenever these behaviors become abnormal or problematic, a lot of times that's linked to some sort of internal conflict. But again, we might not even be aware that internal conflict is there, right? So Freud believed that there were three key components of the brain. He believed that the id is not actual like anatomically, but like the mind brain. He believed that the id was the one that was focusing on the needs and wants, and that this is the inner child. This is the part of your brain that's always going, hey, I want that, I want to do that, I need this, I need that, I'm hungry, I'm tired, I'm this, I'm that, and just kind of always with all the things you want, need, etc. That's the id, okay? And it's just always rambling. It has no self-control. It has no filter. If it's mad, it's mad. If it's upset, it's upset. It's just going, okay? If you've ever been around a 2-year-old, this is your inner 2-year-old. On the other end is your shoulder angel, your Jiminy Cricket, your inner parent. This is your super ego, which is the one that's reminding you of the moral standards. I want ice cream. Ice cream isn't healthy for us. I'm tired. We still have more work to do. I'm mad at this person. We need to control ourselves. So the id and the super ego are just kind of always going back and forth. Inner child, inner parent, right? Focus on needs and wants, focus on moral standards and self-control. And then Freud believed that in the middle, we all have this mediator, which is the ego. This is the one that's doing the rational thinking. This is the one that's going back and forth between the two. And ultimately, it's the ego that's controlling what behaviors are going to be expressed. Is your ego letting your id win? Is your ego siding too much with your superego? Is your ego just kind of asleep? And so you're constantly having this inner child, inner parent conflict. Freud basically believed that our abnormal behaviors and psychological disorders could be traced back in a lot of ways to the way that these id, superego, and ego are all interacting together. Now, the psychodynamic model is a very deterministic theory, which means that Freud very much proposed that all of our behaviors are determined by a past experience. If whatever problem you're having right now, we can go back to some earlier point in life and we can pinpoint this thing or this series of things is what is now causing you to have this problem. Now, Freud believed that a lot of our expressions of disorders can be controlled, I apologize for my dogs, can be controlled or can be moderated by the defense mechanisms that we develop. But relying too strongly on a certain defense mechanism, relying on it too often, relying it to be in the driver's seat too much of the time can cause its own set of problems. So now we're going to review what Freud believed the different defense mechanisms were. So he believed, and there's more than this, but he believed that there were 7 key defense mechanisms. And he did believe that some of them can be very healthy and functional, right? There are times that we have to do some of these things. But the problem is if we're relying on them too much or if they're getting out of control. So the first one is repression. And this is where you avoid anxiety by blocking out difficult thoughts from your consciousness. And this can be really functional sometimes, right? Like, I can't be upset right now. I have work to get done. Or, okay, this thing happened and really upset me, but I'm also on my way to my mom's birthday party. So I kind of need to put that over here and go be like happy and smiley. And so we all do repression, and repression is very functional to an extent. But it can go too far and it can cause you to actually block things from your consciousness too much. One thing that Freud was really interested in was like recovered memories and hypnosis. You've blocked it out so effectively you can't even remember it. And so now we need to kind of get back to those memories. One really interesting study of this is with domestic violence victims. I also teach psychology of domestic violence. If you ever want to watch out for that class, I teach that from a very personal perspective. But you see this quite a bit with domestic violence victims, is there might be certain things that they actually have a hard time recalling details about because they've just blocked it. The next one is denial. And this is where you refuse to acknowledge the existence of a source of anxiety. You've probably heard this used a lot in pop literature of you're in denial. The next one is projection. And that's when you attribute your own unacceptable impulses, motives, or desires to another person. You're jealous. So you're looking at someone else. They are such a jealous person. You're lazy and not pulling your own weight in a group project. But you find someone else to say they are so lazy. If they would just work a little bit harder, this would get done. If you've ever taken social psychology, you can tie this quite a bit to attribution theory in terms of the errors we make in attributing motivations to ourselves and others. But this is basically something negative. You don't want to acknowledge it in yourself, so you're attributing it to another person. I'm going to take a quick pause. Okay. Sorry about that. One of my dogs came and trotted out very proudly, showing me something that they had raided from one of my kids' rooms. So had to handle that. The joys out of working from a home office. So projection was you're taking something in yourself that you don't want to acknowledge because it's unacceptable and you're attributing it to another person. Rationalization is creating a socially acceptable reason for an action that actually did not have good motives, right? You failed to get a project done, you had a lazy day, you sat and watched movies and scrolled on your phone all day. You know damn well you had plenty of time to get this done, but you didn't do it because you weren't in the mood to, right? And so then you come up with this narrative of everyone needs self-care and our 24/7 workload is out of control and people don't allow for work-life balance and all that, which, by the way, I firmly believe all those things. But you're taking something that you know you messed up on or you didn't have a good motive for it, and you're spinning it in a way of, here's why what I did wasn't actually that bad. Here's how I can defend it. That's rationalization. And the key to these defense mechanisms is it's not just convincing somebody else, right? This isn't necessarily me having this conversation with my husband or my boss or my parents or my kids or my sister or whatever. This is my brain having these conversations within itself in a way that I'm actually deceiving myself. That's why Freud believed that this could lead to different psychological disorders and abnormalities, because you're actually deceiving yourself. All right, the next one is displacement. And that's where you move anger or hostility away from the actual target of your anger onto a substitute. Okay. You had a really bad day at work. Your boss is a jerk. They made you mad. You go home and you yell at your partner. Okay. Your parents are infuriating. They have pushed every single one of your buttons. And so your kids get home from school and you're just picking. Okay. Somebody has upset you. Something has upset you. And you cannot take out on that target. So you take it out on a different target. That's displacement. Intellectualization is substituting an emotional reaction for a logical response. This thing made me really upset. It's much easier for me to use logic brain than emotion brain, so I don't have to process how upset this thing made me, okay? I got fired, I've lost my job, I'm devastated, but I'm going to start looking at research about the economy and how many people are losing their jobs, and I'm just going to logic brain this of, within the last year, 17% of people have lost a job they loved, corporations are downsizing to whatever it might be, and I just totally made up those statistics. But you're letting your logic brain take over. That way you don't have to process the emotion of what has just happened to you, okay? And then the last one is regression. And this is where an individual retreats from a conflict by moving to an earlier stage of their development where these levels of maturation and responsibility are not expected. If you've ever seen somebody who, whenever they're in like an argument or a disagreement, they start acting very childlike, that's regression. If you've ever heard the research finding that it's not uncommon for children who are being molested or sexually abused, even if they're older, like late elementary school, early teenagers, to begin wetting the bed again. Freud would say that's an example of regression. Your brain is trying to move itself back to an earlier place in time when things were safer. Now, a student of Freud's was named Erik Erikson. And Erikson thought some of Freud's ideas were a little crazy, but he thought that Freud really had something with this idea of conflicts coming from different stages. So Erikson created a typology where you have different key conflicts that you're working through at different points in your life. And if these conflicts are unresolved, that's going to cause difficulties with your mental and emotional health. Okay, as a developmental psychologist, I really like Erikson's theory. I think it has a lot of value to it. It's one of those theories that you read, it's like, okay, this is logical. This just makes sense. Your book actually did not talk about this in this place in this way. So this is just a little bonus content because it's a theory I like. All right, so Erikson's theory of psychosocial development, again, Erikson was a theory of Freud, which is why I'm putting this with the psychodynamic theories. So I'm going to go through this very quickly because this is not a developmental psychology class, but it still has value. If you're watching for the bonus point activity, your second keyword is going to be cow, like moo cow. Okay. The first stage is during infancy to 18 months, and that's trust versus mistrust. You're working on weeding out which adults can I trust, which adults can I not trust. And the virtue that's developed during that phase is hope, if this is a successful conflict. If you start looking at some childhood disorders, which we're not doing because this class is adult psychopathology, so unfortunately, we don't get to dive into some of these, but there are some disorders such as like reactive attachment disorder and things like that, that somebody coming from this perspective would say, these disorders are developing because this stage was not successful in resolving this conflict of trust versus mistrust. Fun little bonus fact is a lot of people who follow Erikson's model would say this is why you don't want to do like the cry it out methods with your babies where you just kind of let them cry themselves back to sleep, because they would say this really is creating a lot of instability with the child of, can I trust my parent to be there for me when I need them, when I'm calling for them, when I'm distressed, and that could reduce the chances of them healthily working through this particular conflict stage. The next one is 18 months to 3 years, the toddler period, and that's autonomy versus shame and doubt. If you have ever been around a toddler, you know that during this age range, one of the key mantras that will be told to you over and over and over with various levels of frustration is, I can do it myself. Right? They're playing with their autonomy. They're playing with what can they do themselves. What are they capable of accomplishing independently? If you don't allow them to do that, it can create shame and doubt in them. Or if when you do allow them to do it and they make a mistake, you shame them for it. Repeat. See, this is why I always help you. That can cause this conflict to not be solved effectively during this age range. So I would say for optimal mental health and to reduce the risk of disorders later in life, let kids play around with, I can do it myself. If there's something they mess up on, be very gentle and understanding. If you know that's okay, all human beings make mistakes, grown-up make mistakes here too. Let me help you. Here's how we help this same mistake not happen in the future. 3 to 5 years is preschool years. This is initiative versus guilt. During the initiative versus guilt phase, if you've been around kids this age range, they are really playing around with the idea of, let me make up a game. Let me make up the rules. Let me propose what we're going to do right now. Because they're playing around with that idea of, can I come up with an idea and execute it and deliver it to other people? So play the game they make up. It's good for their mental health. If this is not resolved well, it can lead to feelings of guilt, and it can lead to issues being very wishy-washy of, my ideas aren't very good anyway, people don't like my ideas, people don't accept my ideas, I might as well just go along with the crowd because I don't come up with good ideas. Okay, and that kind of goes into their later sense of purpose in life. Can I plan something out and take the initiative to make it happen? 5 to 13 years is industry versus inferiority, and this is when they're developing competency. During this age, they're starting to take new classes at school and get an idea for what they're good at and what they're not. They're trying new sports, physical activities, extracurricular activities, and getting an idea for what they're good at and what they're not. All children need to feel like they're good at something. They need to feel like they have a skill. They need to feel like they have a gift. Children need to be allowed to try out lots of different things to find something they feel like that they are good at and they are talented at. That's very important for this stage. A lot of insecurities can develop if that's not allowed to happen. On the flip side, the concerns with this stage, and we would see this linked to a lot of the personality disorders we're going to talk about, particularly things like narcissistic personality disorder, is if they're allowed to feel like they're good at everything, it's going to create this elevated sense of self that I'm special, I'm unique, I'm better than other people, I'm smarter than other people, I'm more talented than other people. So this would be one of the concerns with like the participation medals, right? Kids need to really develop a a good template for evaluating what am I good at and what am I not. They don't need to be given an award for every single thing that they try. Can we still go get ice cream even if you really did not do very good at your basketball game? Absolutely. As long as you had fun. Not everyone's going to be good at everything they think is fun, and that's okay. I like to draw. I'm not great at drawing, but I like to draw. It's okay. I'm not good at it. That's fine. I still think it's fun. It's a good stress relief. But so that's what's going on in the industry versus inferiority stage. And people who follow this typology would say that we could probably look at a lot of the personality disorders and plot them right here, probably within these two, within the initiative versus guilt and the industry versus inferiority. The next stage is identity versus confusion, 13 to 21 years. Who are you and why is that who you are? Which identity feels comfortable? You see teenagers and young adults experiment with a lot of different identities. What feels comfortable to me? What feels like a true expression of who I am? Okay. The next from 21 to 39 is intimacy versus isolation. This is where individuals are old enough that they're really kind of taking the wheel on what do my social interactions look like. I have the opportunity for friends outside of where I go to school, right? I can create my own social circles. I don't have somebody telling me, no, you have to invite Sam to your birthday party, right? You can form your own social circles. You can find new social circles. You can drive. You have your own money. Like you're able to form what your relationships with other people look like. This intimacy is not specifically sexual intimacy, okay? This has nothing to do with sex. This is more so emotional intimacy of what do my social relationship look like, feel like, what do my bonds with other people look like, feel like, what does it mean to me when I say I love somebody? The next phase is generativity versus stagnation, and that's where you are evaluating your life of, am I doing something meaningful or am I kind of just here? Now, obviously, as we're getting into these older years, we're not tracing back quite as much. Here's where a disorder would have come from. Obviously, depression, anxiety, things like that can develop in older age, but this isn't going to be quite as deterministic in the theory as some of these other ones. So generativity versus stagnation is what I'm doing mattering, or am I just here? Have I contributed to the world? Those sorts of things. Obviously, this could lead to depression if you feel like I'm just here. There's some really interesting research out there about the way that the United States does retirement and how much rates of depression increase when people retire, because a lot of times the thought is, I'm going to have all this free time, I'm going to have extra money, I can do what I want, but they haven't really planned out what am I retiring to other than I get my free time back. So, okay, you have your free time back, but you're working a crossword puzzle and watching television. Like, what are you doing with your life? And so we actually do see rates of depression increase quite a bit, especially since a lot of times retirement removes the social circle, which would then go back to what friendships have you developed, et cetera, et cetera. And then finally, the last one is integrity versus despair. This is where individuals are getting towards the end of their life, and they're really evaluating, am I happy with the life that I lived, or am I looking back with a lot of regrets? So this is the end of life phase. One thing I will mention is if you have individuals that learn they are dying earlier than this, we can kind of see some of these skipped and going into integrity versus despair early, right? Like if you have somebody who's 30 and learns that they're dying of cancer, they might go immediately into this integrity versus despair phase because that's what's relevant to them. This is getting really long, so I'm going to stop this and have this be part 1 of the series, and then I'll pick up with a second video that's going to be part 2, just so it's not getting crazy long.